I hope now that your body is nourished, that will nourish your mind over the next hour. And so we're pleased to have two speakers this morning, Amy Kleisis of the League of Women Voters of Greater Pittsburgh Civic Education Project, and Dr. Lara Putnam from the University of Pittsburgh's Institute for Cyber Law and Security. So over the next 40 minutes, they'll discuss how groups circulate incorrect information about voting in elections. Then we'll talk about the voting process. And the last 20 minutes will be devoted to your questions and answers. So at this time, it's my pleasure to present Amy Kleisis and Dr. Lara Putnam.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting the League of Women Voters. I'm so happy to be here and to share this with Dr. Putnam. Is it working fine? No?
I'm going to use this one.
All right. I can't do to both. Yeah. The League of Women Voters is a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties. However, in this divided world, we do have positions on issues, and you can find them on our website. I'm sort of talking about how to find reliable information in an unreliable world. And during this election cycle, I've been remembering something my mother said to me about her childhood education. And this may resonate with some of you, but she said the most important thing she was taught was how to be a good citizen. And as a retired educator, 6 years ago, I fulfilled one of my bucket list items by joining the League of Women Voters. I always thought they were an amazing organization because of their nonpartisanship. And my experience has been met and exceeded my expectations. But one of my favorite League quotes is the mission statement, empowering voters, defending democracy. Very simple, right? Empowering voters, defending democracy. And another one is democracy is not a spectator sport. You know, our democracy is supposed to be powered by participation of citizens. And the League's goal from its founding in 1920, when women got the vote, is to inspire active participation of informed voters. So it's two parts. It's being active, but it's also being informed. So, you know, what we've seen in recent years is how, and I know Dr. Putnam will talk about this, just repeating falsehoods and lies is very effective to ramp up disinformation and makes voters pretty cynical. So we feel part of the solution is to help citizens find reliable resources and become high information voters. So the bottom line, sound bites are easy and maybe false, and voting and elections are complicated and require each citizen to take responsibility for finding accurate information and then acting on it. So to kind of answer my mother, I would say how to be a good citizen is to recognize your civic duty and vote, but also be informed about that vote. So one reason, sort of my thing in the League of Women Voters is civic education, and I feel we positively affect things by providing context for people when they vote. We learned from our early experiences in high schools that, you know, there was a real civic education gap. In Pennsylvania, if you have had children, you know most of that, like they get American history in American government in 9th grade. And so by the time you talk to them about voting as seniors, that's a distant memory. So it was very obvious to us that we needed to provide civic education when we talk to young people. And about 30 years ago, we sort of feel that this happened when Pennsylvania schools and curriculums moved to just the basics. These really good social studies curriculums were lost. In recent years, science has come back with the STEM movement, and you may be surprised or not surprised to learn that the federal government spends $50 per student per year on STEM education and 5 cents per student per year on civics education. So in this existential moment, we feel that to preserve our democracy and the democratic principles that we thought were so secure, we need that same kind of push for civic education for young people. And there is something called the CivX Now Coalition, which I just learned about. The League of Women Voters of the United States is a member, and they're pushing for civic education to come back into schools in a big way. There's a bill in the Senate. It's S 4384, and also in the House, HR 1814, and it's called the Civics Secures Democracy Act, and it would require more civic education for our kids. We thoroughly endorse that kind of a movement, and there's even efforts in Pittsburgh and across Pennsylvania by the Committee of 70, one of our partners, and PA Youth Vote, to get a 2-week civic education program into the high schools for seniors. So that's the background of kind of what we do, but we add civic education into everything we do, and it's very, very obvious and anchored in our website. So if you go to our website, you'll see we have not only voting and election information, it's www.lwvpgh.org, but also PA government pages and all kinds of graphics about democracy and finding information. It's in our voter resource library. So as I said, I'm director of civic education in schools and community, and I manage 4 teams of volunteers. We visit high schools, colleges, organizations, and our mission and different community organizations. And now we've gotten into videos. You'll see our presence on PCTV 21 if any of you get that. But we deliver information with voter drives, but also presentations and videos, again, to raise that civic IQ that we think is so important. So let me talk about the one of the things that we've done. It's a video called The Journey of an Official Election Ballot. And after training as a poll worker, I've only been a poll worker 2 years. This will be my 3rd year. And hearing the falsehoods about our processes, my head was exploding. So I thought, take action, make a video. And I created this video that you can find in the Voter Resource Library under videos. We have 10 videos in our Voter Resource Library. But it's the before, during, and after path of a ballot. So I'm going to try to tell you about it. It's a little bit in the weeds, but I'm going to try to walk you through that process, and you'll see, and I'm sure Dr. Putnam will be able to also point out all the areas where disinformation has taken control here. So voters want their votes to count, right? Secure elections are essential to our democracy, and the reliability of election results depends on maintaining the accuracy and security of election equipment, the forms, and the ballots. So we want to ensure 2 things: that all legal votes are counted accurately, and that no votes can be altered after being cast. We take pride in our history of free and fair elections in the United States, at least we have in the past, but some of that history does not meet current standards for election integrity. But by the end of this talk, I hope you'll understand that despite the multitude of false messages, our election systems have advanced, are reliable, and secure. So there's 4 steps. Step 1 is advanced preparation, then election day, then tallying the results, and then verifying the results. Step 1, advanced preparation. All voting materials and machines are kept in Allegheny County's secure elections warehouse with 24-hour video surveillance and professional security personnel. The county boards of elections tests voting machines by running decks of sample ballots and verifying the scanned results. This all happens before the election. Allegheny County's I just saw the number today, 1,324 precincts receive updated lists of registered voters from their locality in the form of poll books, along with the ballots that are designed specifically for each precinct with the barcodes, okay? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So here's the fun fact. Did you know that the precinct barcode is used to tally the votes on an official ballot? Did everybody know what that barcode is on the side of the ballot, that left side? So that is tied to each precinct. No identifiable information is tied to any individual voter, only to the voter's precinct, so the votes can be counted. So every ballot in your precinct will have exactly the same barcode down that left side. Election poll workers are then recruited and trained, and they swear an oath to uphold the laws and rights before they begin serving on election day. And I can tell you, That's kind of an important part that we do when we start the day. Okay, now we've reached election day. In each polling place, poll workers are led by a judge of elections who, along with other workers, open up the polling place in a prescribed step-by-step manner. Throughout the 14-hour day, the judge of election monitors everything, all the procedures and policies, and also settles disputes or if there's any question about anything. A person checks in and the poll worker will check their name against the poll book to show, and the person will write their signature, and that shows that they voted. Citizens who vote for the first time in a polling place, and there's 38 polling places that have changed, so if you want to just double check that, it's probably good to go and check at the Allegheny County website. But 38 different precincts will require people to show ID the first time they vote, and they might not be aware of that. A list of all qualified voters who've received mail-in ballots is posted at the beginning of each polling place at the entrance, and also a list of the mail-in people who got mail-in ballots is in the poll book. So once a person has got a mail-in ballot, they cannot vote with a regular ballot. However, there is a process. If you change your mind, you can bring in all your materials, take it to the polling place, and surrender them, and your ballot will be spoiled, and you will get a regular ballot. I've seen people I've heard of people getting provisional ballots after they do this process, but that's wrong. You really can vote by mail, and I see you shaking your heads, yes. What you can't do is take your voted mail-in ballot to the polling place and turn it in, right? Everybody knows that. You must return your own voted mail-in ballot to the Allegheny County Elections Office. They do have drop boxes there during regular working hours now. And they have to be turned in by November 8 at 8 p.m. and postmarks do not count. This is for Anita. For those of you in District 12, PA's representative to U.S. Congress, Mike Doyle, who's on your ballot, is not the Mike Doyle who's just retired, right? So this is the race between Summerlee and Democrat Summerlee and Republican Mike Doyle. So back to the polling place, everybody completes these paper ballots, and you'd be surprised how many people walk in and are surprised we're back to paper and pencil, and they think it's going backwards. But I'll tell you, it's actually a very good, verifiable way to vote. If the people will do the paper ballot or the express vote machine, if they can't do paper and pencil, that's for accessibility. And if you make a mistake, get a new ballot because the machine will spit it out. Every voter then feeds their own ballot or card into the scanning machine. I had a question, what if a ballot is left on the machine without being scanned? We can't touch it. We have privacy, secrecy envelopes, folders. And so we either have to run into the parking lot and get the voter to come back and scan it, or hopefully let them know they have to come back in and start that process over again, and we would spoil that ballot. So there's so many checks and balances that people just don't understand, right? The scanning tabulating machine is never connected to the internet. There's so much disinformation about machines. It's just tabulating that barcode for that precinct. So now where all the misinformation also comes is tallying the results. The judge of elections starts this step-by-step procedure to close down the polling place. Somebody helps the judge of election audit and inventory the equipment and the voted ballots, which are put into secure bags with seals and locks. So let me tell you some of the security measures. The DS200 scanning machine tallies are recorded on 2 thumb drives and a printed machine tape. There's 4 copies of that. The paper voted ballots are returned along with those machine tapes and thumb drives in a secured bag with plastic locks. And that these bags are all color-coded. The poll workers then count the unvoted ballots and place them in a separate bag to be returned, and they are locked into the bottom drawer of the DS200 scanner. Each precinct must return an account for every single ballot that they receive. We put this count in the return sheets and in the chain of custody log. The total number of voters from the numbered list that the poll workers make is compared to the number of voted ballots scanned, the voted provisional ballots that have been collected, and the spoiled ballots. So you can see that the tally of actual voters with voted ballots, you sit there and you do some math, so it's not possible that 100 people can come in and vote, right? The judge of election hand delivers official return envelopes and those voted ballots to the county elections division before the evening is over. And that's that chain of custody again. In each polling place, the DS200 machine general results tape and this return sheet are posted in the front of the polling place for the public to view. And then there's processing mail-in ballots, where we're still having a lot of controversy. You may have heard there was a court case that was just decided that precincts will be allowed, counties are allowed to tell the precincts to cure any ballots, mail-in ballots that come in that, for instance, don't have the date on them. So that's probably going to result in more lawsuits, but hopefully it clarifies how to process these things. And sorry, I'm going to take a little drink here. So processing mail-in ballots on election day. The mail-in and absentee ballot outer envelopes have a barcode, and that barcode is scanned, the date and signatures checked, and the outer envelopes are separated from the inner secrecy envelope. And in some large counties, this process does begin a little bit ahead of time. Just like voters signed the poll book when they entered, right? This process of scanning the the barcode on the outer envelope is what updates the voter's record to show that they voted. So that's kind of another fun fact about a barcode. That's the second barcode that we use. It's on the mail-in absentee ballot outer envelope, and it's unique for every voter. So scanning that barcode updates the voter's record, okay? But a not so fun fact, what occurs in 37 states but not in Pennsylvania? Is everybody saying pre-canvassing? Yeah, I heard your right answer. And that would mean we could actually tally votes, not report them, but tally votes before election day. But that does not happen in Pennsylvania. So they made a new law that you could get a pot of money, and Allegheny County took $4 million from this $45 million pot of money to process mail-in ballots beginning 7 a.m. on election day and continuing uninterrupted till they are all counted. So this is a new law. And our county, it sounds like Allegheny County is going to be doing that. They did take $4 million to help probably hire more people so they could continually process these mail-in ballots. So here's the math problem. To completely count or tally the vote, you have to add all of the in-person votes, right, that happen on election day, plus the verified provisional ballots, plus all mail-in and absentee ballots that are including overseas and military. And then you have to remember there's 3 reasons results are delayed even more than just getting all those votes together. Counting mail-in ballots can only start at 7 a.m. Counting provisional ballots can take 7 to 10 days. And recounts that are mandated by courts or PA law also can make things stretch out. Counting all, bottom line, counting all legal votes is math, not fraud. And to add to this, each state has their own election certification deadlines. I won't bore you with how many states do it faster than us, but 5 states, Hawaii, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Tennessee do not have fixed certification deadlines. So there's that uncertainty again. Delaware's done on November 10th, mandated state law. Verifying, real quick, verifying the results. Who certifies the final votes for each race? 67 counties must certify their own results. And if you recall, Laura probably is going to talk about this, so I won't say too much, but 3 counties did refuse to certify the primary results, and because of pending lawsuits, and that dragged on for a while. So note to self, when you're doing your mail-in ballot, please make sure that you sign and date that outer envelope and use the secrecy envelope. And then the PA Secretary of State will certify the results for all the races. But legal challenges remain and will probably be a concern for this election. As I said, using the paper ballot ensures election integrity in 2 ways. Voters verify that they completed their ballots correctly. They can check them and as they intended. And also physical audits are possible. And the old way was pulling ballots, 2,000 or 2%, but they don't do that anymore. They do a new process called risk limiting audits, which is a statistical way to tabulate and make sure that the results are accurate. And if there's discrepancies, they can still do hand counts. So you've completed this journey. Why is it important to know behind the scenes? Because our elections have built-in safeguards and security that over time have continually improved election integrity. And the facts about 2020, which are still sort of plaguing us, after exhaustive fact checks, analyses, and 600 court cases, there was no evidence of widespread voter fraud, no evidence that any voting systems malfunctioned, and in fact, no evidence that voting results would have been overturned in any precinct in the United States. That's saying something. And that confirmed the results of the 2020 election. And yet, since 2020, 49 states have introduced more than 440 bills that include provisions to restrict voting rights. As of the summer, 19 states had passed 34 laws making it harder for some to cast ballots. 88 of those bills in 9 states rolled over into the 2022 legislative sessions. That's from the Brenner Center for Justice. So take action and vote in every election, and please drag your children and your grandchildren to the polls, as I know you do. Reminder, October 24th at 5 is the last day to register to vote. November 1st at 5 o'clock is the last day to apply for a mail-in ballot. If anybody is applying this late, I would say go to over-the-counter voting. And if you don't know what that is, we can talk about that later. And most of all, the mail-in ballots must be in the hands of the people at the election office by 8 p.m. on November 8th. And nothing else counts. And if I have a little time later, I'll tell you a little bit more about our website, but I don't want to take any more time away from Laura. Okay, great. Thank you.
Excellent. So, thank you all. Is the mic working well for? Should I use the? Let's see. Should I use the hand mic instead, or is this fine? Okay, I'll just hold this. No problem. So thank you all for having me here. It's a delight to be here. And I'm really happy that we got the accurate information first. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the false narratives that are out there about elections in general and elections in Pennsylvania in particular, and the kinds of vulnerability to our democratic system that generates. But part of why this order of our speaking is helpful is that it sort of mimics for you what you want to do anytime that you're responding to disinformation or a false narrative. You want to respond with, some people talk about a truth sandwich. Give the accurate information first, then explain why you're having to correct some narrative that's out there, and then close with the accurate information, right? So you never want to unintentionally amplify false information or disinformation because there are sort of basic facts about human psychology that are in play here. What we hear first and what we hear most often is what we tend to believe, even if we think that we're immune to the pull of false information. So now let me take a step back and give you three definitions that I think will help us understand part of how false information and the kind of damage that false information can do. So we use the term disinformation for intentionally spread false information, right? So a systematic effort to knowingly spread false information is called disinformation, and that might be by foreign actors, that might be by domestic national actors, it might be people with a profit motive or with people with a political motive. The term misinformation is when people spread false information, but unknowingly, right? You trust the information, you spread the information, not knowing that it was inaccurate. And misinformation can also be really damaging. In fact, the biggest spread of disinformation comes from it being picked up by other people who share it along, not knowing that what they're sharing is false. A final term that I want to define for you is malinformation, which is specific items of information that themselves are accurate, but they've been taken out of context and used as evidence for a false narrative. So if I were to say, there are people on the Allegheny County voter rolls who are written down as living at an address that they no longer live at, that is a true fact about the Allegheny County voter rolls. If we instantly remove people with no verification, we would be at risk of disenfranchising people. So there's a whole system in place to make sure that voter rolls are updated at the right pace and with verification. And those safeguards mean that there's a lag. So if I were to say there are individuals registered who appear on the voter rolls at addresses that they no longer live at, and that's how we know that there was fraud in 2020, that would be an example of malinformation. I've taken a small fact, which is in and of itself true, and I've placed it within the context of a narrative that is false, but it seems to be supporting that narrative. So already from what I've described, you can see how disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation work together. Disinformation is intentionally falsely pushed out. People pick it up because they believe it. If they're hearing it from a trusted leader, they're likely to believe it. They push it out. It reaches more people. That opens the door for malinformation, because once that false narrative, there's a false set of claims together, a false narrative that's believed by some subset of people, then individual accurate facts can come to seem like part of a conspiracy, or can be turned into seeming evidence for that sort of pushes further the false claims. So, and throughout this all, what we see is that there's a sort of, I think of it as a distrust-disinformation cycle. Distrust accelerates disinformation. If you don't trust trustworthy institutional sources, you're more open to believing false claims. And meanwhile, if you believe those false claims, that's going to destroy the trust that you should have had in more trustworthy sources. If you believe false claims that local election officials committed fraud in 2020, what should be a trustworthy source suddenly becomes a source that you are no longer trusting. And the thing is that we need trust. We need to be able to trust our trustworthy local sources, because none of us can possibly be experts in everything, or even experts in much of anything, right? So we're always, in the realm of elections in particular, we're always having to trust that that whole system that's been described for us is basically functioning, and that there are experts out there who can look at that and say, yeah, that system is one that has been judged to be reliable, audits have been carried out, and so on. So when we're thinking about combating disinformation, the answer can't be distrust everything, right? The answer can't be do your own research and distrust everything. That simply opens the door for more misinformation and for more malinformation, right? So the question becomes, how do we restore trust in trustworthy institutions, right? So two thoughts on how to push back against disinformation without becoming inadvertently part of the problem. Because if we're passing along, even if we think that we're debunking information, if I say, isn't it crazy that everyone thinks that blah, 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 by spreading that information, I'm becoming part of the problem, in part because on social media, any Facebook post that I spread, even if I think that I'm spreading it with like a a headline or with a comment that is criticizing that the algorithm responds to my engagement by pushing that information further and faster. So any engagement that you give on social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, to a false or deceiving post, is telling the algorithm, it's telling the platform, oh, this piece of information, this post, pulls eyeballs into our platform. So we're going to spread it further and farther, right? And of course, the part of the way that social media can be particularly damaging for our democracy is that, you know, each of us, as we interact with any platform like Facebook or like Twitter, or like Instagram, we're leaving a sort of data trail of our reactions to things, right? And and what that means is that without any, you know, human involvement or intentional involvement, the platforms are already set up to take advantage of the data trail, the sort of data exhaust trail that we leave as we, you know, go through Facebook and like certain things and interact with certain things and read things longer. That sets us up to be micro-targeted by the algorithms so that the information that is most likely to be most emotionally engaging for us reaches us, right? And so what that means is that the images that reach you or reach other people via Facebook or via Twitter or Instagram are the images that are most likely to cause an emotional reaction, an instant reaction, most likely to hit you at the parts of your brain that are most emotionally reactive rather than the parts that are able to reason and pause and think. So all of us need to push ourselves not to push back against that reactivity. Okay, so first rule of pushing back against disinformation is that it's always better to pre-bunk than to be stuck in the position of debunking. So what is pre-bunking? Pre-bunking is getting accurate information out ahead of the game. You want people to hear first the accurate information. So that's the mission that we're on here. So the journey of the vote video is exactly about pre-bunking. It's about getting accurate information in all of its details out there. And it can be helpful to let people know that you think that they may hear some people trying to raise their anxiety or trying to make them doubt or distrust. But first, what you want to do is give them accurate information. So you say, you know, the elections this year are going to be on such and such a date, and you should be voting in such and such a place. In the past, sometimes flyers have been handed out in this neighborhood that have given people reason to be confused about where to vote. That's why it's important for us all to know that on such and such a date, the election is going to be in this place, and we're all going to be able to vote there. So that's an example of pre-bunking. Give them the accurate information, let people know that they might hear something different, but you don't need to go into detail about what that is. So you don't want people to be confused. Here's the accurate information. What do we do if you are interacting with someone who has already been exposed to and maybe already believes a false narrative? So you're like the horse has already left the barn on pre-bunking. That person has already been hit by a false narrative and they've been persuaded by it. Okay, the first thing to do is you want to empathize with the emotions and validate the emotions even as you're invalidating the false information. So you want to say, it totally makes sense that you're confused about this, or of course we're all worried about this. So find a space of emotional shared ground. Like, this election is making all of us anxious. Then you want to give them the accurate information. In fact, in Pennsylvania, mail-in ballots have a barcode on the outside of the envelope that identifies voters. So it's impossible for any person to return more than one mail-in ballot. So give them the accurate information. And then give them an explanation. You might be hearing this, or you might have heard this because the details around the mail-in ballots, these new safeguards were put in place as part of the 2020 election, and it became really politicized, and a lot of leading voices tried to create confusion around this. So what have we done so far? You empathize with the emotion, you gave them accurate information, and you explained why it is that they might have heard something else, right? So you gave them not just the fact, but a new way of thinking about why they had come into contact with that misleading information, with that false claim. And the final thing that you want to do is hand them an empowering action item, because you want people to be able to be engaged in, to feel empowered by the new piece of information that's reached, by the accurate information that's reached them, rather than feeling, what you don't want people to feel is sort of shut down or foolish, or like they want to pull back, like oh, I've been told. You don't want people to have to choose between self-respect and the accurate information. So you want them to be able to respect themselves and to think of, and we all want to believe that we are good people doing the right thing in our communities. So you want them to be able to believe that they're good people doing the right thing for themselves and for their communities, while also believing in the accurate information that you've handed them. And one way to do that is to empower them and to be like, and you can do that by saying, I'm really glad you raised this question with me, because it gave us a chance to talk about this together. Are there other people who you think you might want to point to accurate information sources? Or you can ask them, what do you think I could be doing differently? Are there things that we could be doing to reach more people with this, in fact, accurate information? So you want to help them become part of the solution, right? So that it becomes a positive part of their identity. Be like, oh, okay, I'm a person who knows how to get accurate information. So that they're not left from your conversation going, oh, if I believe her, I have to believe that I'm an idiot. None of us want to believe that about ourselves. And it's not true. It's that genuinely voting is complicated and confusing. None of us should feel like idiots for not knowing any piece of this. So we always want to give ourselves a chance, and the people who we're talking to, a way to move forward feeling empowered. Now I'm going to shift to talking about some of the some disinformation about elections in particular. Everything that I've said so far really applies to any kind of disinformation, for instance, about public health, about vaccines, and so on. About elections in particular, it's really important that, let's say, that we know people need to feel secure and informed and confident that their vote will count in order for people to participate fully in elections. One thing that means is that if we're really worried about voter suppression and we see something online, we saw this just this last week when there were images circulating online of people who had registered to vote in Florida, having been told by local elections officials that they were able, that although they had a past felony conviction, they were now able to be registered to vote, and they were registered by local election officials to vote, and then they were violently arrested by police. Now, this is a horrible thing to have happened, and it is absolutely urgent that action be taken to remediate the kind of staging of disenfranchisement and the sort of weaponization of confusion that happened there. So I'm not minimizing the importance of that story, but when people share on social media images of people getting arrested for registering to vote, what's the impact of that? The impact of that is voter suppression. So even if you think, oh, I want more people to be registered to vote, I am outraged by this, theatrical, these arrests that happened in Florida, and so I want this to stop. Well, you're not stopping it by sharing about it on social media. Actually, what you're doing is increasing the possibility that other people are going to see this footage and be like, I no longer feel secure, safe, or positive about voting. I am nervous and scared about voting because people are getting arrested for registering to vote. Anything that you do that increases the negative emotional charge around voting or increases the cognitive load around voting makes it more likely that people won't vote, right? And what we want is for people to vote. So we want to be really careful about, thinking, reacting with outrage and sharing, even if you're sharing accurate information, let's say on social media, if it's inflammatory information that your images that you're sharing, you are very possibly doing more harm than good, right? Because what you want to think about is, if you're just adding to the cacophony of information out there, that's not getting any one voter closer to being able to be secure and confident and informed. Now, you can help voters become secure and confident and informed about voting. How can you do that? By working through the networks of people who know you, right? So working whether face-to-face or through one-on-one communication with people who trust you who know you and trust you, those are the people for whom you can be a really important guide to ensuring that the people that you know are secure, well-informed, and confident that their vote will be counted, right? But you can't have that impact for people who don't know you. You can't, through sort of anonymous means like social media, you are not a known and trusted voice. You're just one more piece of noise adding to the cognitive load. So you really want to take your time and attention and turn it towards people who know you, people who you know, and help empower people who you know to feel secure and confident and to know that their vote will be counted. Whether that's about reaching out to people who in your network, who you know are in your same congressional district and talking to them about who you're voting for and why, whether that's about reaching out to older members of your family or friends of your parents and who you think may have some confusion around mail-in ballots and sharing links to the Journey of the Vote video. So you want to use your networks because the point is you can have a really positive impact by sharing accurate information through networks of people who know and trust you. That way you're not just adding to the cacophony, right? You're not just adding to the noise and confusion. If you see something worrisome, don't share the thing that worried you. Go back to an accurate, trustworthy source and share the accurate, trustworthy information. So rather than like rage responding by decrying the thing that you didn't like, either share accurate information to people who trust you, make a donation to one of the many organizations working to shore up voting rights. So that's the League of Women Voters, the ACLU, and so on. Or become trained as a volunteer, let's say for instance, with election protection through ACLU, and become, educate yourself about where to send people for accurate information about voting. And I want to make a plug here for the ACLU Election or Common Cause Election Protection 866 Our Vote is a great place to send people for absolutely accurate information about voting. So a final set of thoughts about elections and disinformation in Pennsylvania in particular. In Pennsylvania this year, probably about 25% of ballots will be cast by mail. Judging if the proportion of ballots that are cast by mail matches roughly what the proportion was in this year's primary and in last November's general election, about 80% of mail-in ballots will be cast by Democrats, and about 20% of mail-in ballots will be cast by Republicans. That's because people are hearing very different messages from different information ecosystems about whether to trust the mail-in ballot system. People are hearing different messages from candidates about whether different candidates are sending out different messages about whether they want their supporters to vote by mail-in ballots or not. In principle, it's all fine. Every voter in Pennsylvania has a right to vote by mail if they choose. That was created as part of the bipartisan Act 77, which created no excuse mail-in balloting as an option for all Pennsylvania voters. And every voter's vote should count equally. Mail-in ballots should count and must count. In-person ballots should count and must count. So and that message has been heard across the state, although in different proportions by people who have different partisan orientations. But in last November, 2/3 of the mail-in ballots that were cast in Pennsylvania came from outside of the 3 largest counties. So in Philadelphia, about 10% of mail-in ballots statewide came from Philadelphia last November in the judicial elections. About 10% came from Montgomery County. About 15% of mail-in ballots statewide came from Allegheny County. But the rest, fully 2/3 of the mail-in ballots cast came from all across the state, which included a lot of smaller rural counties that up through 2021 were much slower to count mail-in ballots. And that's why, for instance, in the Commonwealth Court race from last fall, one of the Democrats running for Commonwealth Court seemed on election night to be in the preliminary count that was just ballots cast on election day plus ballots counted on election day plus some counties' mail-in ballots, but not most of them. the Democrats seem to be at a 20,000 vote disadvantage in that preliminary count, but that preliminary count is not a representative sample of Pennsylvania voters who cast ballots. And so once all of the many smaller and more rural counties fully reported their mail-in votes, the Democratic candidate for Commonwealth Court ended up with a 20,000 vote lead, and indeed she won. But those votes weren't fully counted. That wasn't apparent until 3 days after Election Day. And again, this is not a reason for panic. The message is not panic. The message is, in Pennsylvania, elections night is not results night. And that's fine. That's not evidence of any kind of fraud. That's not evidence of any kind of skullduggery. It's that there are strong safeguards in place surrounding mail-in votes, and that results in a slower count, right? So that message is a really important one to make sure that we all embrace in advance and share in advance, precisely because of this distrust, disinformation, misinformation, malinformation cycle, right? It's an accurate fact that mail-in ballots will be maybe counted more slowly and are likely to be very disproportionately for one party rather than the other. But if that accurate basic fact gets subsumed into a set of false claims, so that gets used as malinformation to say, see, we told you couldn't trust voting, right? Then it can add fuel to the fire of disinformation and of false claims around election fraud. So it's really important that we understand. And in one thing that we saw in 2020 was, for instance, some national politicians and some state politicians, including our then president, using Philadelphia, for instance, as a supposed example of supposed mail-in ballot fraud, right? And we need to recognize that part of what that's doing is drawing on a long tradition in this country that implicitly suggested that some people's vote was more of a right and other people's vote was more of a privilege that could be taken away. And that racialized tradition of racialized division, it's a legacy of Jim Crow in our country, in which the images of white people voting are more often treated as a matter of like sanctified right, and images of Black people voting have been traditionally questioned and used to suggest that some people's votes are more subject to fraud or less valuable or somehow more of a privilege that should be revoked or can be revoked. That kind of racialized legacy within our country means that there's a sort of dog whistle involved when allegations of voter fraud come to center on urban core areas, right? So what we need to be really clear on is that mail-in ballots are safe and secure, and they come from around the state of Pennsylvania, right? So the mental face that we should all have, or the accurate median image of mail-in ballots within Pennsylvania is like somebody's grandmother in Lancaster County, right? Mail-in ballots disproportionately are cast by people who are older. They're less likely to be cast by people who are younger. They're less often chosen by, at least in the past 2 elections, people who are voters of color have been less likely to choose, Democrats who are voters of color are less likely to choose mail-in ballots and more likely to vote in person. So the accurate face of mail-in ballots within Pennsylvania is, like an aging Jewish grandma, and that's fine, right? But we need to make sure that the press accurately reflects and that the narratives that we share with our friends accurately reflect that the face of mail-in balloting in Pennsylvania is all of us, right? And we all need to make sure that the rule of law is followed, which also means cementing an expectation that court rulings regarding things like the counting of undated ballots, court rulings surrounding things like ballot curing, are followed, right? The rule of law requires that we reinforce the legitimacy and authority of our court system as the ultimate arbiter of any allegations of voter fraud on the one hand, or rules that ensure that we all have access, that every Pennsylvanian who has a right to vote is actually able to cast a ballot and have that ballot counted. So to end, let me just emphasize, what's the bottom line here? We want to make sure that we're educating ourselves about the accurate information, that we're only sharing accurate information and that we are not inadvertently sharing information, whether, especially through social media, that can raise the sort of negative emotional charge around voting or raise the amount of cognitive load around voting, just the surge of competing claims around voting. So what you especially want to do is work through the networks of people who trust you and make sure that all of those people have access to information, accurate information about voting, and are ready to, stand up and be part of voting and approach voting in a positive and confident way, knowing that their vote will be counted, and knowing that by voting we can determine who represents us in government. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy, and Dr. Putnam for a most thought-provoking set of remarks. At this time, we'll open the floor for questions. Sally, let me bring you the mic.
Thank you. You keep talking about accurate people. Who are they? How do I know who is accurate and who isn't?
So, institutions that have the institutions that exist to support and govern the vote are accurate institutions. So I would look to the county, your county websites about voting information are accurate sources. The League of Women Voters is an accurate source. The state Secretary of State website is an accurate source of information about voting. And mainstream local newspapers are accurate sources of information about voting. So those are all the places that
She's asking television. What's that?
I think if information that you're hearing from a televised source doesn't match what you're hearing from the Secretary of State or your local county board of elections, your local officials, or nonpartisan sources like the League of Women Voters, then I would change the channel.
Okay, my question is about polling and how accurate polls are, how much we can trust the integrity of the polls.
So I think very, very wisely, you've separated out two different questions in your question. There's the accuracy of polls and the integrity of polls. I think the vast majority of polls are trying to be as accurate as they can. So I have a lot of faith in the integrity of any of the established pollsters, that especially polls that are run by either colleges or universities. So in Pennsylvania, there's Franklin and Marshall, there's the Muhlenberg poll, and so on. And the mainstream news outlets also run polls. Those also, I have great confidence in the integrity of those pollsters. Now, accuracy is more difficult because there are patterns of non-response that are very hard to judge and adjust for. These days, so few people will answer their phone or reply to requests to give their political views or other views online, that the people who do answer the phone tend to be unrepresentative of the population of voters as a whole. And that's not only between different parties, for instance, but it's within parties. So within, for instance, Republican voters, not every Republican voter is equally likely to respond to a pollster about their political views. Not every Democratic voter is equally likely as other Democrats to respond about their political intentions. And that makes it very difficult for pollsters, even operating absolutely in good faith, to make judgments that assess who are we not reaching, who are we disproportionately reaching, and how should we balance the results to adjust the weights given to different responses to try to accurately provide an image of the people who are going to actually show up to vote, in this case in November. And that's very hard. So integrity, yes. Accuracy, we won't know until after the election.
Just a follow-up question, if I may. Are there polls that are not coming from universities and other reputable sources deliberately spreading misinformation? Are there those that we need to be careful of?
So there's a technique sometimes used by campaigns that is very unfortunate called a push poll, which presents itself as a poll, but in fact is sharing information that is distorting and that is intended to change. It's not intended to find out who you're currently planning to vote for. It's intending to change who you're planning to vote for. So, and there have been, for instance, reports of push polls of this kind, so precisely recently in the PA, in the Summerlee Mike Doyle race, for instance, there have been reports of push polls that attempt to confuse people about which is the Democratic and which is the Republican candidate in that race, as an example of how push polls work.
I appreciate the detail regarding all the processes and checks and balances, but a question does the governor of the Commonwealth have any participation legally or responsibility vis-a-vis the election process?
Well, in that he picks the Secretary of State, I would say that, oops, I don't have my mic. Governors pick the Secretary of State or they're elected. And so it's really, I think in most states, the Secretary of States is the one that oversees the elections. So.
This is not true in Pennsylvania, but I understand that some states are going to be doing their balloting through the internet. I don't know, I can't remember. I just heard it on reputable news. I can't believe that.
I have never heard that. You know, my daughter lives in Colorado and they have 100% mail-in voting, and they've done that for years and it's super secure. But I haven't heard about, internet type based.
I can't believe they would do that, Well, one thing, don't forget, there is a third way to vote. You can go to the County Board of Elections, just walk in the door, request a ballot and vote.
Until November 1st. That's the mail-in ballot deadline. You can do that over-the-counter voting until November 1st that way.
Okay, and it is encouraging to hear that there's going to be more civic education, because it's very painful to think the whole January 6th thing would never have happened if people had known.
This isn't necessarily the focus of your talk, but what chances do you think there is that Pennsylvania will move toward pre-canvassing to allow you to actually open the ballots and count? I mean, what do you think is going on there that we systematically want to drag this out?
One of the things about the League of Women Voters, we just want better voter access, not tied to a specific party, but when access tightens, that's not where we are. We want better access, right? And pre-canvassing just makes people trust the system more. But probably until the legislature changes this, it isn't going to happen in Pennsylvania. I wouldn't think. That's just I don't want to be partisan, but that's probably an opinion.
The current legislative Republicans in the state legislature are trying to use that as a political bargaining tool. So their approach I think this is a nonpartisan description that they would agree with they think they should get something in return for allowing pre-canvassing. Pre-canvassing is that doing the preliminary processing of mail-in ballots in advance so that the counting of mail-in ballots doesn't lag after Election Day.
What we have now is we just take the outer envelope off, the secrecy envelope, and then stack the secrecy envelopes, not open till Election Day. Pre-canvassing allows you to open the secrecy envelopes, tally the vote, but not count it. And 39 states do that, but we don't. Currently, they do pre-canvassing. Yes, they start counting the vote early.
I have a question here. What I hear you saying, and Dr. Putnam, I think that what you said about how you should approach people who give you information that is not correct is very hard to convince people. I've talked to a lot of people how to talk to people from different viewpoints, and people get too emotional in the whole thing. So it needs to be practiced. But on the other hand, I also hear you saying, if you don't know enough, shut up.
So I wouldn't say if you don't know enough, shut up. I would say we all should be humble, and we all should use our own humility in regard to the limits of our knowledge to do two things. First of all, to empathize with other people who may be confused or who may be listening to sources that are not reliable, because we all should know that, that's not a bad human being, that is just a human being like me, and there are limits to all of our knowledge. And then we all should be turning to trustworthy sources. And by trustworthy sources, like at a minimum, sources that, the reason that institutional sources are more trustworthy is in any institution, whether that's an institution, a long-standing organization with local chapters like the League of Women Voters, public government institutions, local newspapers, local institutions of higher education. All of those are institutions that have a front door that people can go to and hold people accountable. So there's a reason that places that have a sort of feet on the ground, bricks and mortar, human presence within communities have systems that hold them accountable and that make them reliable. It's not that, for instance, universities are somehow magically never wrong. And it's not that academics are magically never wrong, but if I'm wrong about something, I'm part of an institution that has a whole set of structures in place so that people can talk back to me and correct me and hold me accountable. Whereas someone posting something on the internet with no public door, no boots on the ground, no face, there's no way to hold that person accountable. So rather than saying, if you don't know, shut up, I would say, all of us should be thinking, what are the trustworthy local institutions that we can go to first to educate ourselves better, and second, that we can amplify those voices of the trustworthy local institutions.
I want to say too, that I think you can always say a shout out for complexity. Everything is so, the sound bites are easy and people want to just believe the sound bites, but really the truth is a little more complex than that, right? And we just have this aversion to finding out more shades of gray. There's more to it than this quick answer. So I think sometimes just shouting out, this is complex, there's a little more to it, you may need to do a little research, sometimes helps.
You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, which is perfectly fine. You talk about institutions you can trust. Mm-hmm. Would you like to comment about the Supreme Court?
Well, currently on some issues around voting access, the Supreme Court, the different members of the Supreme Court have shown themselves to be split and to have different views. So, on the one hand, if for those of us who believe that ensuring the expansion of voting rights is always the bottom line, it's really critical to ensure that every American who has a right to vote is able to vote, that's concerning. But ultimately, I'm not here to say distrust the Supreme Court in a sense, because it's really critical that we respect the line of authority and the line of appeal for court rulings, because otherwise, on issues of voting, including around issues of voting, because that's critical to the rule of law, is being able to say, we know how election disputes are going to be adjudicated. They're going to go within Pennsylvania, they're going to go to the Commonwealth Court, that the line of appeal then goes to the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court, the line of appeal then moves upward. So we have to, on the one hand, reiterate the need for trusting and following that legal line of appeal within our electoral system, but also know that when we have the opportunity to vote for either to vote in judicial elections or to vote in congressional and Senate and presidential elections, if voting rights are important to us, then that may be one of the factors that when we vote our values, that's going to shape the choices that we make.
Yeah. And voting for our judges is it's very hard to find information. We have it on our website every time in the municipal, the municipal elections, but it's hard to find that information, and people really get very confused about it. And I would also say, bottom line, elections have consequences. Some people are very strategic and long-term in their thinking, and elections have consequences.
Well, thank you very much, Amy Kleisis, Dr. Putnam, for being here this morning and enlightening us about the voting process and how to be smarter voters. There are some postcards here from the League of Women Voters of Pittsburgh that have web page addresses and a QR code, so feel free to pick them up on your way out. And again, thank you all for being here this morning. Our next brunch and lecture is going to be on Sunday, December 4th, when Cantor Reinwald is going to speak about a program for at-risk youth that he's been involved with for a number of years. So again, thanks for being here, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.